If anyone is watching on webcast, it'd be a good idea to follow the link that's on the screen on there. That's where to find all the carbon literacy guide, which is what we're going to be speaking about today. On the tables, there's a big pile of papers. That big pile of papers is the carbon literacy guide. We're going to be going through that today and just exploring it, having a look at how it works, thinking about how you might find the information that you might be looking for in all that, because it is quite a big document. So my first question to everyone who's here is, does anyone remember these? It's in the last workshop, nobody did. They were brutal. So these were what we called the low carbon route maps. They were published, or the first version of them was published in 2011. And there was one for energy efficiency, one for food, one for transport. There was nothing for waste and kind of reuse projects that we were doing. And you can see from the image in the middle there, quite a lot of it was taken up by carbon calculations, which thankfully, through the new tools that have been produced, we don't need to do anymore. So there was lots of reasons why these were not fit for purpose anymore, apart from the fact that, a lot of this stuff has moved on since 2011. So a lot of the information that was in them was out of date. So we wanted to replace them. We wanted to produce a resource that did all of these things at once. So we wanted to help people to understand what climate change is, why it's happening, help people feel motivated to take action, understand where carbon emissions come from to better target projects. Sorry about the typo there. Understand how to reduce carbon emissions, know what support there is to support low carbon projects and behaviors, and then finally know how to design a community-led carbon reduction project, i.e. a CCF project. So he was trying to do all of those things at once. And looking at that and thinking about the work we've been doing around carbon literacy with the Carbon Literacy Project, we realized that really what we were aiming to produce was a kind of carbon literacy guide or manual, call it what you will. So that's what is on the tables in front of you. And this is broadly how we decided to structure it. The first thing to say is I printed out some copies of it today. It's not really intended to be printed out as a kind of manual to be read from first page to last page. The idea is it's a kind of group of resources that kind of fit together, but different people will access different bits of it at different times, depending on kind of your interests, your knowledge, what stage of a project you're at. So hopefully it's useful throughout your project rather than just before you start it, and then after it you're like, I wish I'd read that. Hopefully it's helpful throughout. So it starts off with a low carbon vision. We're going to go through each of these sections over the next wee bit. Introduction to climate change. And then the next section was where emissions come from and how to reduce them. And then finally, how do I design a community-led carbon reducing project? So as you can see, it kind of becomes more specific as you go through it, as you target towards what kind of projects you'd be looking at doing. This is what it looks like. So it's on your desk there, printed out. So in this different sections. And as I said, different people or the intention is different people would access different bits of the resource or use it in different ways. So if you were, for example, brand new to the CCF, perhaps you are on the committee of a village hall, and the heating bills are really huge, and you've heard about this thing called the CCF that might be able to help you out with that. It might be a good idea to start at the beginning and find out, what is this kind of low carbon world we're trying to work towards, and what is climate change, and what's it got to do with the heating bills at my home? So you might start from the beginning, or perhaps you're a community organisation that has been refurbishing bikes with young people because it's a good way to kind of engage them, it's a good activity for them, and you want some more funding for your bike project, but now you've got to make it to do kind of link in with the climate change thing. You might start with the transport section of where emissions come from and how to reduce them, and then go on to the kind of project ideas around transport and cycling to help you kind of design your project for the CCF. So that's a little bit about the kind of the structure and how it might work. So starting with section 1, if you can find on your tables, if you can find the section that has that picture on the front of the kind of crowd of people, that would be good. Hopefully they've not got too mixed up from the last time. Just shuffle through them. And I guess if anyone is watching the live stream, then they should be looking for the first section on that web URL that I showed at the beginning. Has everyone found it? Yep. Okay. So this section came about from some of the themed gatherings that we ran in about 2016. And one of the exercises we did at each of the themed gatherings was coming up with a vision of a low-carbon future for each of the themes that the workshop was about. So at the transport gathering, we were thinking about what are we aiming towards when we think of a low-carbon world when it comes to transport, for example. So I had all these ideas kind of noted down, photographs of flip charts that I'd taken from a workshop from years ago, and lots of really good ideas, but I didn't really know where to put them. And then this seemed like a really sensible place to put them. And I think it was Alan who came up with the idea of put it at the beginning, because this is what, you've got to catch people's imagination. This is what we're aiming for. It's really important to kind of sell that at the beginning. So all the ideas that are in there, organized by each of the 4 themes, are kind of ideas for a low-carbon future that people came up with at those workshops. So I'm going to ask, so just a wee group activity just now involving this section. So if you can choose on your tables, just choose one of the visions that you'd like to look at. So whether it's food or transport or energy or waste, choose one that you think you'd like to discuss in your groups. Have a look at the vision that's sketched out in that. And just discuss it. Is it what you would expect? Is there anything else you would expect to be in there? Or some things more or less relevant to your community? So just reflect on what's in there, thinking about what you might put in there. Okay? I'll just give you a couple of minutes to discuss that. So decide on your theme first, and then gather around and discuss it in your groups. Sorry, I'm going to have to just stop your conversations there so we can move on. Hopefully you've had a chance to look through that at least and read some of the points, even if you've not had a discussion yet. So I'm just going to ask go around the tables, and if one person from each table could tell me some of their thoughts about the vision that they looked at. Did you agree with it? Were there things in there that you surprised by, anything that you think's missing, for example? And I'm going to ask you to kind of speak into the microphone as well, because there are some five people watching us at home, so hello to those people. And so I'll start with this table here.
So we covered travel, and what we were saying is we agree with all the points. We found that it covered quite a wide spectrum. What we did say is obviously, consistent travel and cheaper travel and things would help to make travel more accessible. And we also said that possibly another point that could be added is allowing people to think outside the box when it comes to travel times, and making sure that businesses can allow people to work from home and not travel into work, or travel at different times and not have to be the normal 9 to 5 and that type of thing.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you very much. So I think that came out in the other workshop as well, that with getting to this vision, it's kind of how we agree with that, but how do we get there? And that's looking at the different levels of action that are needed to do that. Okay, this group, do you have anything to? Yeah.
I think we agree with everything that you guys said. We also picked travel. I agree with all the points. I think a point to make as well, I'm from an area in Western Bartonshire which is quite deprived, so I think the assuming that you can kind of get places, like saying that like the buses and things are accessible and things like that, it's not, everyone's kind of from a different kind of background, so it's I can't really think of what else to kind of put on it, but no, I agree with all the points. Is there anything else anybody else wants to put on?
Just to add a little bit. So we laid out the ideas we have there, but something just remind me of something that I don't really see so much here in Scotland. It's mentioned lift share or something like that. I actually found that here, I don't know if it's traditional or it's cultural thing, it's not very common comparing to the way it is, for example, in some parts of Africa. And to see that is something that is being considered, like encouraged, I think it's a good thing.
Right, thank you very much. Yeah, so I guess what's on the screen there is a suggestion of an activity of how you could the kind of questions you could ask to get people thinking about this for your own communities. And yeah, depending on your particular circumstances, different ideas would come out for sure. Okay, this table at the back here. Who wants to? Okay.
So we were looking at waste and resources, and we sort of agreed with the majority. And there was one at the end that talks about well-paid and skilled jobs in refurbishing and repairing products. And obviously, while employment is important, we also thought that that could be something that is shared more throughout the community, where people who have those skills are sharing that widely, and then it means that people can do things themselves at home without having to rely on repair people being available, and that means hopefully things will be reused more, and sharing that knowledge throughout the whole community rather than it just being particular skilled individuals. Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so that's the vision. So that's us setting out our stall for what we're trying to aim for with all this stuff. So the second section is the one that looks like that. It's got a kind of picture of a kind of barren ice sheet on the front of it, and it's this is all about. It's a brief introduction to climate change. So really, it's about climate change. What are the impacts of it? What is this thing called climate change, and why should we be concerned about it? It's got a kind of brief kind of background of some of the science around it, so the greenhouse effect and greenhouse gases, and then of course you've got to have a graph in there. So there are some kind of graphs and charts to help you understand that. Hopefully, it's a useful resource, a kind of resource of some kind of facts. If you're looking for those, if you're looking to communicate some of this information to your communities, hopefully it's a kind of useful resource for that. And we're going to kind of just skip past that into the next section, but useful to know that one's there. So the next section you're looking for is the one with the section 3 with the windmills on the front of it. The wind turbines, sorry, not windmills. So in this section, we start to think about, right, so we've looked at the vision, we've looked about climate change, why we need to take action. Now it's really saying, well, how does that relate to my everyday life? So it starts with a little bit about emissions at a kind of national scale and some action at a national scale. So what are Scotland's emissions like, for example? A graph there of emissions to 2015.
And then it goes on to think about, well, how does that relate to our everyday lives? And this is where it starts to get more relevant to us. So what makes up our typical footprint? Where are the most emissions coming from? Where are the biggest opportunities for saving? And then we come on to saying, well, how do we reduce them? Okay, so we came up with this idea, this kind of theory of change, I guess, we're calling it, for how to shrink a carbon footprint. And there's a little bit about the kind of carbon calculation stuff that I said was quite prominent in the low carbon route maps before. But really it's just there to help you understand the kind of theory behind reducing it, so you can come up with your own ideas without having to do the sums and still be confident, well, that's going to reduce emissions even if I'm not able to do the sums exactly to measure how much. So a carbon footprint is made up of, or the size of a carbon footprint is determined by two things. One is how much you do or use something, and then also how much carbon emissions doing that thing produces. And we call that the carbon intensity of the thing. So, for example, if you were to travel 1 mile, so how much you do or use something, so that's how far you travel, 1 mile, multiplied by the carbon intensity of how you move. So if you're walking, very small. If you're driving a huge truck, very large. Okay, so those two things are what's influencing it. So if you want to reduce the carbon footprint, we came up with the two basic ways to do that are, first of all, do things less. So if you do things less, so for example, if you travel less far, if you travel half a mile instead of a mile, then you shrink the distance and you also shrink the footprint. So that's quite a straightforward one, quite obvious one. The other one is about tackling this side of the equation and saying, well, if you do things differently, you can also reduce the footprint. So if you change the carbon intensity of the thing you're doing, so if you switch your big truck for an electric vehicle, for example, the carbon intensity of that mode of transport is reduced. So if you reduce the emissions factor, which measures the carbon intensity, you also reduce the footprint. Okay, so that's the kind of the theory behind it, but we sum it up as just those two simple statements. Whatever you're doing, if you can do it less, or if you can do it differently, you'll reduce the carbon footprint, as long as you know how to do it differently that's going to reduce it, but we'll come on to that. So if you take an example of home heating, for example, doing it less with home heating, you're either trying to be more efficient or making do with less. Okay, it's not about sitting at home shivering, being cold. It's about how can I be comfortable but use less heating fuel, for example. So if you're going to be more efficient, you might use a heating timer, so the heating is only on when you're in the house, you're not heating an empty house. Or you might insulate the house so the boiler doesn't have to work as hard to heat your house up. It's only heating the house, not outside as well. Or you can make do with less, for example, put on a jumper. Don't sit around the house in shorts and t-shirt. Or you could use a thermostat, so you can control the temperature better and sit in the house with a lower temperature. So that's an example of doing it less for heating. It's not about, as I say, it's not about turning the heating off and being cold. It's about being comfortable but using less. Be more efficient. Doing it differently, I chose the most complicated one I could to look at this. But with doing it differently, it's about swapping one way of doing something for another. And in all cases, it's looking at a hierarchy of doing things. There's always a higher carbon and a lower carbon way of doing things, and it's trying to find the lower carbon way of doing something. So, for example, with food, the biggest part of your food footprint is from the production of the food. It's not your food miles, and packaging are only about 10%. We often focus on that, but actually food production is the biggest part. So people often say, we've got to go vegan. And obviously, if you went vegan, then that moves you way up the hierarchy there. But even just swapping, for example, beef and lamb for poultry then that's a step in the right direction. So it's about moving people in the right direction, not necessarily taking that big step all the way up the hierarchy at once. It might be moving people along, for example. Okay, we're going to have a go at using this theory for reducing carbon footprints, and we're going to play a little bit of a game with my friend Joe. All right, that was Joe. It's not this Joe, by the way. Okay, so in your groups, I'd like you together there's a series of actions, and people listening at home can play along with this as well. Have a look at these actions from Joe's day and think, is there a way that he could do this less, or is there a way that he could do this differently to reduce his carbon footprint? Okay, so in your groups, you're coming up with a way he can do that, but also I want you to come up with a reason why he should do that. Why is this going to be a good thing for Joe? All right, I'm going to ask you to, once you come up with your ideas and how you're going to sell it, I'm going to ask you to shout it out. And Fiona, sitting over there, is going to be the judge, and she's going to award points to which idea she thinks is the best. Okay? Right, so it's not just thinking about the action, it's thinking about the benefits to Joe of doing this. Okay? Is that clear for everyone? Great. Okay, so the first one is Joe gets in his electric shower, takes 10 minutes to really wake up, and if he did this every day, that produces 236 kilograms of carbon a year. And when you've come up with an idea, hold up your less or different to let us know which way you're going. Okay? Some ideas. So we're going to start with that table at the back there because you've got the microphone. Okay. So you're holding up a different sign. Can you let us know?
We've realised that Joe's motivation in the morning is to wake up, not necessarily get clean. So we think he should have a cold shower for 10 minutes and a cup of coffee. Different.
Okay. Great. Okay.
That
was
would
actually one of
save
the
carbon because he's not using his electric heating water system.
That was in the last workshop. We had someone said he should go and just swim in the loch. So same idea, obviously. Can you pass the microphone over to this table? Okay. This group, what idea did you come up with?
Well, we had several. One was also have a cold shower. There was another. He could fit a flow restrictor to his shower, and he could just have a long lie on the weekend and get properly rested, and then not need to wake up in the shower every day.
Okay, great. So we've got a shower restrictor to reduce the flow of water. That's good.
Oh, sorry.
This table?
We thought maybe...
It won't make a noise, it's just for the people.
Okay. We thought it might be, looking at the underlying reason why he really needs 10 minutes shower every morning. Perhaps he doesn't get good night's sleep or not enough sleep. Perhaps he's using mobile to his bed until he falls dead, And talking to him, looking at the background reason, perhaps it helps him to have a better sleep, which is good for his health and reduces unnecessary energy, yes.
Okay. So good night's sleep and then a cold shower to wake him up seems to be that. Is there any from the people watching at home? No? Okay. Okay, Fiona. Which one would you say? Okay. So he still gets 10 minutes, he's just... I mean, the previous group, one of the groups that won this round came up with the idea that if you just shared the shower with someone else, that's a bit like car sharing. And so yeah, okay. So the next round. So now Joe is had his shower, he's woken up, he's going to go to work, and he sets off on his 3-mile commute to work in his car. If he does that every day, every working day for a year, it's almost 0.5 ton of carbon emissions. Okay, so again, same idea. How could he do it less or differently, and why would that be a good thing for Joe? Okay. Okay, we're going to start with the group that's got the microphone again, just here. So you're holding up a different, so how is he going to do it different?
Okay, we thought that 3 miles was an acceptable amount to cycle, and he could just commute by bike.
Okay, and why should he do that rather than just driving his car?
Because it would save him a lot of money. MOTs, petrol, road tax, it all adds up. And it would be good for his mental and physical health, and it would save an enormous amount of carbon.
Excellent. Okay, all good reasons. Thank you. Okay, this table here. Who's going to go? Anil, are you going to?
Much like Joe said there, we would do things differently. So maybe instead of taking the car, we would encourage Joe to take the bike to work. If he's fit enough, he can walk. I don't know how long 3 miles would take, maybe around an hour, but it's an option. And also just change his transport habits. So instead of taking the car, he can car share with a colleague, or use the bus or train, or even work from home, if that's an option as well.
Okay, so lots of different options there. Okay, great. Okay.
Well, all of our ideas are gone. We said all of them.
Okay, well, it's about selling it as much as the idea. So
yeah, we did hear somebody behind us say that if he didn't have his 10-minute shower in the morning, he'd have a little bit longer to actually do his 3-mile walk if he did that. So that would be quite good, and he'd wake up at the same time. Yeah, we pretty much said all of them, didn't we? There was no. Yeah, maybe half the week he would maybe use his car, and then maybe do walking or cycling a couple other days. So
you could maybe do it when the weather's nice.
So, but yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, over to you, Fiona, then. Which one? So it was 3 miles is a reasonable distance to cycle. It's not too far. Yeah, most people were talking about cycling, so it was really the pitch that you were most sold by. Oh, right, okay then, fine. There's no prizes, so I'm not, it's not like... Okay, so the next one. So Joe is a bit of a slave to fashion. His jeans have lost a button, and he fancied a new pair anyway. So he decides to buy a new pair of jeans, and he just throws the other ones in the bin. Say if he... On average, he reckons he buys 2 pairs of jeans a year, and that's about 12 kilograms of carbon emissions per year. So again, how could he do that less or differently to reduce his carbon impact? sin bin. Yes. Okay, have we come up with some ideas then? So we're going to start with, we'll just start where the microphone is again. So
We said, well, first of all, the obvious things is like to sew on the button and to like donate his old pair. But we also said that there's companies out there, for example, one company called Mud Jeans, and you can lease a jeans. So basically, you have it for a couple of months and you pay a little lease every month. But that means if he doesn't want, if he wants a new model, he can just give his old jeans back to the company. They give him a new one, so he can have new jeans without throwing anything away. And the jeans will either get to a new person or get upcycled by the company.
great. Okay, so that's an excellent example of doing it differently with buying. So he's not buying stuff; he's leasing stuff, and he can still change his fashion year to year, but without using as much resources. So, okay, great. This table.
So we agree with yourselves, but we also said, so we said taking it for repairs, getting it sewn, or taking it to charity shop if he doesn't want to keep it anymore. But we also talked about how there's no, we don't see so much of shops like the way there is 2 libraries, or there is so much sewing classes going on within community projects and so on that's supported by Climate Change Fund. But there is nothing like, maybe there is, but I haven't seen it, like repair shops where somebody can go just to get their jacket sewn or button replaced or something like that. So maybe something like that can be good as well, apart from getting it put to the charity.
So is that thing again between, either learning to do it ourselves or finding people you can pay to do it, or that can do it for you. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. That's a good one. And then if you pass it back there.
So we had a few ideas. We thought he could either take them along to hopefully CCF organised swap shop, and he could donate his old jeans and get a new pair of jeans, and then he can still keep up his fashionable side. We also thought that he could just change the trend and just go for braces. And then he doesn't need to worry about sewing the button on, and he's updated his look as well.
Okay, excellent. Right, that's quite a tough choice this time, Fiona, I think.
I think I like the braces.
Great. Okay, great. Just going back to that, I just think it's worth kind of maybe thinking, go back to that idea of leasing a pair of jeans. That's a common thing when we talk about the circular economy, perhaps leasing cars or leasing all kinds of things instead of buying them. But I'm just wondering how that saves carbon emissions. What do you think the ways that might save carbon emissions are?
We don't have to buy our individual jeans. Maybe jeans is not the greatest example because everyone wears them on a daily basis, but we all lease our kilt hire or whatever it might be, our posh frock, and there is still people obviously go out and buy them for one-off wears and they sit in the wardrobe forever. But if we're able to lease more of our items, maybe our winter gear, perhaps stuff that we don't wear as much, or our summer holiday gear, we're only going to wear for 1 week or whatever it might be.
Uh-huh.
There's loads of potential.
Yeah, okay. So it's about, a lot of stuff. I guess that's the same idea as behind tool libraries, etc. It's that we're not using this stuff all the time. The other side of that, and it's maybe, again, less relevant to jeans, is the kind of model. In the last workshop, we were talking about things not being built to last, and there's an incentive to sell you a new one rather than repair it, whereas if you're leasing it, the person who owns it has an incentive to repair it and keep it going, because then they can lease it out again, rather than the incentive being to sell you a new one. So it just changes the balance there a little bit. So it's quite interesting. Okay, so it's the end of a long day, and Joe decides to order a takeaway because he can't be bothered cooking. He has a lamb curry with rice, and there's way too much, so he just throws the leftovers in the bin and heads off to bed. If he did that once a week, that's how much carbon emissions he would produce. I can see it. People are already starting to get a bit angry with Joe, and the last one now, you can see people positively seething. So, how could he do that? Things less or differently to reduce his impact with that?
Maybe just not having lamb and rice. You know, so we've heard about lamb and rice.
Making it home would save the delivery, you know, the emissions involved in the delivery.
Okay, we're back to the table at the back there then. So, what did you come up with? What way could Joe reduce his carbon footprint?
Well, we felt as though he should change what he eats. You know, that's one option. We know that lamb and rice are both high carbon foods. So if he went for vegetable curry and a naan bread instead, that would be a lower carbon option.
Okay.
But I've just heard a new thing that I didn't know, and if potentially he could use an app or social media to advertise the fact that he's got half of his food left, and someone in need might come round and eat the other half for him. So there we go.
Okay, so is that the Olio food app? Is that, yeah, okay, so the food app that's kind of for food sharing. Okay, so two ways there. Okay, on to this group there. What ideas did you come up with?
We had a couple ideas actually. The leftovers that he throws in the bin, he could actually maybe just keep them for the next day, or instead of throwing them in the bin, he could put them in the food waste caddy, which would then get made into compost. What else did we have? Oh, it just needs to get a life is another thing that we said. And cook more. Yeah, he could have made it himself. So yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, on to this one.
So you can just usually lamb curry from takeaway or is it fresh? It's fresh. You can reuse it again. Put the extra one in the freezer, you know, or invite a friend and have together, you know, his habit or her habit or whatever, you know. So share with someone else and enjoy your time.
So invite a friend round to share the curry. Okay, okay, Fiona. Okay, great. All right, we're going to leave poor Joe there because I don't think he can take any more abuse. So yeah, so I mean that's just some examples of applying the principle to some everyday actions of one individual. I guess in the guide there are 4 sections, and these are really kind of what directly replaces those the route maps. 4 sections based on the 4 themes of the CCF, and in each of those, there's a bit of a breakdown of what makes up a typical carbon footprint. So where do most of the emissions come from for home energy? What about travel? What are the kind of those hierarchies of what's the more low carbon and higher carbon options of doing things? And then it breaks it down into some ideas of ways you could do it less or differently. And these are just some of the kind of common ways that you might do it. It's not supposed to be, this is the definitive list of everything that you can possibly do, but it's some of the common ways. And then the last section is section 4, and that's about designing a project. So I guess at this stage, what you're thinking about is not so much tackling, individual bits of Joe's day, for example, but hopefully by this point you've noticed that you're at a stage where in your communities you've identified a particular behaviour or a particular area you could intervene in to support people to reduce their carbon footprints by doing it less or doing it differently. So perhaps everyone arrives at the school gates by car, so that's the thing you're going to tackle. Or that in your community houses aren't very efficient and people don't have thermostats and they don't understand their bills, so that's where you're going to go in and what you're going to do. So that's where, and as we're at now. And as I said, with this guide, you're likely kind of narrowing down your interest as you go through it. So starting off kind of broadly, but hopefully kind of thinking, which bits of this are most relevant to my community, where are the biggest opportunities for reducing carbon emissions. So the section 4, designing a project, which has these young people having a fun time on the front of it. So it starts off with a bit about behaviour change, and hopefully you'll recognise this diagram from the Shifting Normal guide. And the factors that come at play when you're thinking about people's behaviours. A little section on what makes a community project, so a community-led project. So we always say in the CCF that projects need to be done with and by the community, not to them. So this is about ways of increasing the participation of your project in your design of your project, and thinking about how you can do that and the different levels there are of doing that. And then finally, how do you structure that project? Once you've got a good idea of what you want to do, how do you put it together into a coherent kind of project plan that's going to get funding from someone? Because this is how the funders want to see it. Even if you've had the best idea in the world, if you don't put it into that structure, or if you do put it into that structure, you've got a much better chance of getting funded. So that section is kind of the theory. And then on each of your desks, you should have some kind of single sheets that look a bit like that. And these are kind of project ideas. So really, they're a bit of a template of saying what the structure of a carbon reduction project might look like. And they've all got these kind of sections to it. So what are the project aims? So is it to see more solar panels on roofs in your community? Or is it to get people growing more food? Or is it to increase repair skills in the community, for example? Then it comes down to what's the measurable outcome, and really it's returning back to that idea of how does it save carbon, and reminding ourselves of that to make sure that you're kind of focused on that, and not, because you can have a project aim of getting lots of people on bikes, but if all those people you're getting on bikes were walking places before anyway, it's still not going to save carbon. It's the change that you're looking at. So I think it's important just that section, I think you'll look at it and go, oh, it's stating the obvious, but sometimes it's just needed to focus yourself. Then we run through some of the possible co-benefits that we think might be associated with that project, and how you might evidence them. So how might you prove that these benefits are being caused by your project? And there's a section on what are the risks, which is kind of maybe some of the common problems that the projects might come up against, or some of the things to watch out for that might make them successful or not successful, why they might not fly in some communities. For example, no point trying to do a project about solar panels in a community where no one owns their own house, for example. So just thinking about those kind of things. And then finally, at the end, you finally get to the exciting bit, which is what everyone here is good at, is coming up with what the project activities are and how you might deliver that project in terms of getting people to do these things. There are some examples and ideas. All the examples and ideas have come from the 10 years of CCF projects that have been happening. But I'm sure there are lots of new ideas still out there as well. So it's not just what's in there, that's all you can choose from. I'm sure there's plenty of space for innovation as well. Okay, by my reckoning, it's 2 minutes to the next coffee break, which is... So if there are any questions on this, you'll find all these resources. Again, as I said, it wasn't really designed to be printed out as a booklet. It's presented on a website with these sections, and you can kind of access the sections as you want them to. It's on the CCF web pages in the climate change engagement section. Okay. Are there any questions from anyone just before we go for a break? No? Excellent. All right, okay. If you can leave the kind of printed out guides just here, because we'll use them again as a resource, so please don't walk away with them. You'll find them online if you want them. Great, thank you.